Hello everyone, my name is Gareth Thomas and I am course manager of the AAT at LSBF. I would like to welcome you on this lovely Friday afternoon for another episode of AAT TV, and today I'm going to cover the Level 3 Synoptic Assessment. And what I'd like to do by the end of today's session, hopefully everyone will be quite happy in what is involved in an AAT Synoptic Assessment, what units are covered in the AAT Synoptic Assessment, and how you will approach it and get through the Synoptic Assessment with a distinction grade, which is what we're looking at to do today. So hopefully everyone's got enough time set aside to enjoy the episode this afternoon. You've got your feet up, maybe the boss is out, maybe you're on lunchtime. Regardless of any of this, at the end of the day, you will have achieved your objective. So, without any further to say, I will carry on and talk about key features of AQ216. Now, hopefully, a lot of your students who are watching today will have covered the Level 2 units at AAT. And what you will have covered there, you will have covered 5 units at Level 2. You will have passed those units, hence you're on Level 3. And you'll be looking forward to attacking Level 3 in a particular order that I'm going to recommend today, and then build up to what really today's session is about, which is the Synoptic Assessment and how you will get through this. Now, a little bit of background on the Synoptic Assessment first of all, and it's something that's been developed between the AAT and leaders in industry. So it's actually been developed by accountancy practices and large firms out there. And they decided, since AQ216, the actual launch was September 2016, to put together what we have called a synoptic assessment. And this synoptic assessment examines everything on the course in one particular assessment, and generally done at the end of the course. However, you do have a choice of when you would like to take the synoptic assessment. So that's the background to the development of this. And we'll have a look in greater detail, because as well as synoptic assessments, there was an assessment grading, which for the first time was introduced. Now, ideally, you will be hitting the highest marks, and there are various bands on the grades that you will fall into when you've sat all the units on the particular level that you're looking at. So these were two big developments. And within this development, the AAT have actually added materials. And I'm sure you'll be aware of this. And they've added materials to the website for students to use. So you're now faced with a bank of actual AAT developed resources, which is fantastic. You have the green light zone, which I'm sure that you've used yourselves in the past. You will have e-learning sections. You will have sample assessments. And you will also have what they call SAMs, where there are marking schemes put in as well. And all this was a sort of a strategic development, really, if you like, that was aimed to improve the qualification and help you through your studies. So what I'd like to do to start with is to do a brief recap on what you've already covered. And I'm going to do this by looking at a few slides and then explaining exactly what we are covering at Level 3. Now, to start with, the units covered at Level 3, here's the recap. You know that you will be doing spreadsheets for accountants and ethics for accountants. And there is a reason that I've put that on this side of the screen that you're looking at. Now, the spreadsheets of accountants is really bringing in together all the spreadsheet skills that you use within the workplace. And this is important because as a Level 3 advanced student, you were looking at, in your workplace, producing spreadsheets on maybe a daily basis. Within this unit, the AAT are looking to examine formula, maybe pivot tables, cells references. They're dragging formulas across, producing charts and graphs. So this is one unit that you will be covering. We will also be looking at the ethics unit at Level 3. Now, the ethics unit, a very brief recap, will be putting you in a work-based situation, and they will be asking you to be able to produce the fundamental principles of ethics and what they are and how they're applied in the workplace. So everything is more developed towards the workplace. We've got advanced bookkeeping, And some students already may have studied that. And if you're working in practice, you may have actually used it on an everyday basis as well. Advanced bookkeeping is a development, if you like, from level 2. And that develops on from your bookkeeping transactions and your bookkeeping controls. So that's what this unit is about. It takes it a stage further. It develops your skills. It makes you more useful in the workplace and gives you, increased knowledge. And you'll be dealing with things such as accruals and prepayments. You'll be looking at depreciation and the different methods of the double entry bookkeeping. You'll be writing up a fixed asset register. Okay, maybe the disposals and how to treat the disposals and where you would journal the profit or the loss at the end of the disposal. Encompassed with that would be the extended trial balance, which will take out and produce figures. And that then leads us to final accounts for sole traders and partnerships, which would be the second unit you perhaps would do at level 3. And that takes it from extended trial balance, and it's a natural progression. From there, you'll be covering things like final accounts for sole traders and final accounts for partnerships. You'll be producing these statements, and you'll be producing maybe a profit and loss appropriation account. So that all comes forward. So that would be 4 units you've covered already. We'll also be looking at management accounting costing. Now, no surprises here, everyone. This is being developed from your level 2 elements of costing, and you're taking it a stage further. You're getting together with more techniques. Okay, you're producing more advanced answers to questions. So again, it'll be FIFO, LIFO, weighted average on stocks. Your variances will come forward. Your standard costing. You will be having to develop reports. You'll be covering new techniques such as absorption and marginal costing, and all this is encompassed here. And the last unit you'll be looking at is indirect tax, which for us and for yourselves and in the workplace, that is known as VAT, okay, value added tax. And these are the 6 units that you're going to be looking at level 3. So there's an awful lot that the AAT have developed and an awful lot for you to cover. And needless to say, these come into play within your synoptic assessment. So this is very important stuff to cover and actually to get to grips with. Now, how are these units assessed? Okay, well, what are examined individually are advanced bookkeeping, final accounts for sole traders and partnerships, indirect tax, and the management accounting costing units. All these units are examined on an individual basis. So you will get a separate grade for each one of those units. However, these units, with the exception of indirect tax, are examined within the synoptic assessment. So they actually filter in to the synoptic. In other words, they're examined twice. Okay? However, don't despair, everyone. They're only examined in the synoptic at a lesser extent, if you like, even though it's the same material as the individual units. And there's a reason for that, and I'll tell you that reason with the next slide I'm about to put on the screen in front of you. Okay? And that tells you that spreadsheets and ethics are examined as part of the synoptic assessment only. So important development here, whereas the other units I just talked about are examined individually and the synoptic, your spreadsheets and your ethics are not examined on an individual basis. They are only examined within the synoptic assessment. Now, when this was developed, the synoptic assessment, what the AAT decided was that these were still parts of the qualification spec at level 3. However, they would form the basis of the synoptic assessment, if you like. And as I'll go on to explain, there'll be 2 parts to the synoptic. And part 1 will be mainly geared around ethics, and the part 2 will mainly be geared around the spreadsheets, encompassing the other units. So there'll be a theme, if you like, a section 1 and a section 2. So the good thing is they're not individual, however, they are part of the synoptic. Okay? So hopefully we're quite clear on how the synoptic and what it's made up of. Now, let's have a look how much each unit counts to the overall grade. And now, again, this is very important because I'll come back to the grade bands. And what we have is the synoptic assessment at level 3, not the same as level 2 actually, you may be able to see, accounts for 35% of the overall grade. Now that is a very big weighting, okay? So that really highlights the importance of getting this synoptic assessment in a higher grade and a higher band. So an awful lot of your overall mark depends on getting your ethics, your spreadsheets and your other units correct. So that's the first thing, the real main point. Advanced bookkeeping accounts for 20% of your overall grade. Final accounts prep accounts to 15%. Management accounting costing 20 and indirect tax 10. Now depending on what mark you get for each of those units will depend how it is weighted to an overall mark. So hopefully we're all clear on that. So for a synoptic of 35%, you would get a percentage mark, multiply the 2 out to give you an overall mark. And that is done for the other 4 units as well. So at the end of your course, you will have a total of weighted marks, and that is called your weighted average marks. So that's how your overall grade actually is accounted for. Now, important point to note, even though one of these units, the indirect tax, is only weighted at 10%, that doesn't mean you only have to give 10% of your time for the indirect tax. You still have to give it the same amount of study material and the same amount of homework and commitment and practice as you give all the other units. And another important point I'd like to emphasize here is simply because the indirect tax is not part of the syllabus on the synoptic assessment, okay, you could still see something in the synoptic assessment that refers to indirect tax. So while the main things won't be examined, it still may appear. Now you may ask yourself, well, how can that be? How can indirect tax not be on it, then all of a sudden maybe appear on it? Now, if you think carefully, the indirect tax is also part of the bookkeeping units. So your advanced bookkeeping, you will see VAT within that. And you have control accounts, which you've studied at level 2, and which also comes forward to level 3. And within those control accounts, you will have a VAT control account. So therefore, as it's part of 2 sections within your syllabus, you could get an indirect tax element within your synoptic assessment somewhere along the lines. I don't particularly know in which task, and it depends on how that comes out when you do your computer-based exam on synoptic. So do not ignore that because it's only 10%. Okay, you must give it your maximum effort to get through the synoptic at all units, and I know that you'll be fully aware of that as students and how to approach it. Okay, so how long do we get to do this unit? What are the time allocations? Does it differ? Well, in fact, yes, it does. The synoptic assessment, first of all, it's partly human and partly commuter marked. So that is the first thing to establish. Now, at level 2, when you attempted your level 2, everything apart from the synoptic was marked sort of in-house, as we say, with the AAT. I mean, I think the software was not part of the synoptic, so was excluded. So at level 3, your synoptic is human marked and computer marked. Now that means you won't get feedback for this until 6 weeks after the date of you attempting the synoptic assessment. Now the other units have got instant feedback. So your bookkeeping, your financial accounting preps, final accounts, your costing section and your indirect tax, they're all computer marked, which means that as soon as you've completed the exam, you basically will have a provisional mark available before you leave the examination. Now that's fantastic news because you know exactly where you are and then you can start and get on with things for the next unit, and then you can plan it all right out. However, with the Synoptic, it's slightly different. So there's a human element to the marking. And why that is really is because at some stage you will have to do written answers. And whenever written answers turn up in an exam, then inevitably they need to be human marked. I'll just elaborate on that actually, because the background is there will be a scheme to mark to, as we all know, and you know there will be a right answer which you can look when you do your practice. However, you will seldom write a very, very accurate answer exactly as the same as any model answer. And so interpretation comes into what you're producing, and this interpretation is done by an expert human marker from the AAT who will be putting this together, hence the 6 weeks turnaround. And I hope that's clear for everyone. So individually marked, however, a 6 weeks turnaround for a synoptic assessment. Now, I'd also like to look at the time allocation, which I touched on earlier, really. The synoptic assessment, well, we've got 3 hours to do this. Okay, so that's longer than the other units. And when you think about it, you've got more to do. You've got the ethics, and you've got your spreadsheets, and you're bringing in other units. So this is a 3-hour examination. All the other units, or the financial accounting units, are 2 hours. So that's your advanced accounting and your final accounts prep. Your costing unit is 2.5 hours. However, the indirect tax unit, or the VAT unit as we call it, has got 90 minutes. And you will be seeing how this works also on LSBF TV. So that's the difference in timescale. So it does vary between the units that you're actually doing. Now, Synoptic, 2 sections, okay? Each section contains 90 minutes. However, the second section, which is the spreadsheet section, has 15 minutes extra time to upload. So you have to do this within the exam, and therefore the AAT have allowed you a little bit of extra time. Okay? So the first section is primarily based around an ethical theme, and the second section will be based around a spreadsheet theme. Okay, 90 minutes each. Important point I'm just about to talk about here actually. Okay, section 1 and section 2. You must finish section 1 before section 2. Well, that sounds obvious. I mean, you'd think, well, yeah, of course, I know that. But what we are saying here and what we are advising is that you can't move back to section 1 once you have started section 2. There is not the facility to go back. So the important thing to get together and to practice is to make sure that you're happy with section 1 and you double checked it before moving to section 2. And there's a pop-up on the screen on your sample assessments that you do and on the live assessment that tells you, are you sure you want to transfer over? And as soon as you're sure on this, then you transfer over to the second part of the synoptic assessment. So let's recap. Okay, what are the key features? Well, the first thing is we now know what a synoptic assessment is. Okay, it's testing your knowledge between all sections that you've covered and all units that you have covered on the advanced diploma at level 3. So everything is going to be examined except your indirect tax. Second thing, this should be attempted once you have attempted all the other units. Now, I'd like to again expand slightly on this. And the indirect tax, you get a choice of when you would like to do this. You could either do it at the start of your studies, which we would not recommend, or you could do it at the end of the studies, which we would recommend. Okay. Now, that means you would do your 3 units first, your bookkeeping and your costing units, which I'll refer to. Then you can attempt a synoptic when you've got those units under your belt and you're quite competent and happy and confident in the approach, okay, and you've obtained good grades at them. Then you attempt your synoptic assessment. And when you've done that, then you do the indirect tax. Because some of the knowledge of your bookkeeping will help you in indirect tax, and you'll be far more confident. So that's how you would do it. You do your bookkeeping units, and then you would start off, then do your synoptic. If you choose to do your costing unit first and then the bookkeeping units, that's absolutely fine, as long as you cover what we call the core or the mandatory units before you actually do your synoptic. And then you schedule your synoptic assessment depending on the windows of opportunity that exist for you. And that is something else I will talk about in a second. Now, synoptic assessment at level 3 is only available at certain times of the year. There are only certain windows that you can do the synoptic assessment. This information you will have to find out for any updates on the AAT website. Previously, at level 2, it was almost available every week. So really, you could find a training provider or your training provider that you use and schedule your synoptic assessment, provided you cover the core units. At level 3, that is not the situation. So you would need to check when the availability or the windows of opportunity are. Okay? So when you're planning your year of events, make sure that you bear this in mind and use a study planner really to section out when if all is going well, when you'd like to do your synoptic. Check the timetable on the AAT website. Make sure you do that, everybody, utmost importance, because you may, I hope not, but you may have to plan in a resit. You get an overall grade dependent on where we get to, and the overall grade could be pass, merit or distinction, as we will see. Background to the indirect tax, not part of the synoptic, only individual exam. That's the nice bit on a recap, okay? We know that. But it may appear as part of the synoptic, as already stated. So don't be foxed by it and give it your utmost time. Now, marking by the AAT. Feedback will be 6 weeks. It'll then be released and sent to you as students, so you'll know exactly where you are with the feedback. And the indirect tax, all summarising, really complete that once the synoptic is finished. What about the grades that I talked about? Well, there are 3 bands of grades here. We have a pass, we have a merit, and we have a distinction. And you only get this when your full level 3 is complete. And until that's complete, you can't fall into any of the bands. So the weighted average is taken, and if you fall between 70 and 79 is a pass, 80 to 89 a merit, and 90 to 100 would be your distinction. So it's all weighted up, and then you can fall back into place, and hopefully you will get a distinction. That's exactly what we're looking for. Actually, just to add at this juncture, when you move between sections 1 and 2 in the synoptic assessment, okay, at this level, there are some instructions you will be allowed and given to in the exam. So they will help you. Certainly in your practices it's available and you can look at it. And when you go into the exam, that information is also available, and your exam venue will have that information and will help and talk you through that information. So you'll be allowed to look at that. So don't need to panic on that bit. That's the nice bit. So what approach do we take? Let's have a look. As a student at your age, in a position that you are, advanced diploma student, what are we going to do? You'll be responsible yourselves for a lot of this, and you'll be quite happy to do a lot of the work yourself, as you know you have to do, because you're progressing through your career. So practice the ethics and spreadsheets in whatever books or kits that you're using. That's vitally important. Make sure you get enough practice, because it's not examined individually doesn't mean you can't practice as much. Certainly the writing tasks, go for that and practice, okay? Use the AAT website. There's an awful lot of material on there. As I mentioned earlier, green light, practice assessments, plenty of study kit, okay? Make sure you look at the information that is available. Do these without looking at the answers. Well, it's needless to say, okay? Please don't look at the answers before you've actually attempted the question. We all remember being students. We all know what it's like. If we're not quite sure, it's far, far easier to go to the answer, read the answer and think, oh, I knew that. And then go back to the question and think, well, I now know that. In fact, if we haven't been caught out, you will be. Okay? You don't know the answer. That's why you've gone to it. So what you need to do is to attempt the question, look at the answer and try and match up what you've got. And then hopefully you're something near the answer. Then check the material again and rework the question. Now that's how you actually learn. So it's doing it, don't look, then look, not vice versa. Right? We're not trying to put a question to an answer. And we tell this to students often, so important. Now also what this highlights, it highlights the weaker areas. Now, very important. There'll be areas that you won't like doing and areas that you like doing. The areas you like, you will do again and again, and you will keep practicing. The areas you don't like, you tend to avoid. It's human nature to avoid the areas you don't like. Don't do that. Go for those areas and practice those areas, because that is what you need to be doing time and time again. Okay? That is the important bit. So everyone, in conclusion, we've covered this afternoon on what really is the essence, what a synoptic assessment is and what it consists of. We've also covered the units, we've covered the time it takes, we've covered the weighted average score that you're going to get for each unit. We've covered the windows of opportunity that you have for your synoptic, which should all be part of your planning process. And I urge you to make sure that you keep this all within your mindset when you're getting together your plan for the year on this. Next week, we'll be looking at learning outcomes in more detail, and then we'll also be analysing it on a task-by-task basis over the gradual 8 and 9 weeks we have left. So there'll be learning outcomes, examiners' comments, and then tasks that we'll look at. So thank you very much for watching. Good luck and hope to see you next week.